Before we dig into the meat and potatoes of this review, I wanted to first give voice to a feeling that arose while working on this: regret. It became apparent to me that I should have done companion videos like I've been doing with my Fatal Frame playthroughs. There were so many moments working on this, revisiting key cutscenes, where I sat there thinking, oh, that's what that line was referring to. I'm glad at least the review afforded me some clarity. Anyway, let's get into it. Parasite Eve is a third-person survival horror/ARPG from 1998. In the midst of such classics creeping and crawling onto the scene like Resident Evil, Squaresoft decided that it was high time to throw their hat into the ring as well, using a Japanese novel of the same title as source material, though the game is not an adaptation but an offshoot of the book's storyline. But don't worry, if you never read the novel, that's no biggie. Parasite Eve the video game is an unauthorized continuation of the plot of the original novel, and the author had no input on Squaresoft's game whatsoever. Well, I suppose it's a little unfair. The deal was struck between the original author's publisher and Squaresoft, so it's all above board. Veiled critiques of capitalism's pernicious corruption of creativity aside, and the facts being what they are, it's kinda like we're getting a lascivious peek at Squaresoft's secret fanfic-filled diary. Oh my! Set in New York City at Christmas time, players take on the role of Aya Brea, a bona fide member of New York's finest. But instead of getting something nice for Christmas, this copper gets childhood trauma a la the Lacanian concept of the return of the repressed. It's the only gift that truly keeps on giving, even after decades of therapy. All our girl wanted to do was go on a fancy schmancy date to the opera, but a mysterious prima donna and those dang intrusive thoughts had other plans. Eager to make her solo performance one the audience won't soon forget, Melissa Pierce looks out at the crowd and makes people spontaneously combust. Just about everyone except Aya. Now that I think about it, that kinda works against the whole memorable performance thing. Guess she should have thought that through. Oh well, hopefully Aya is as eloquent as she is drop-dead gorgeous. Because she's about the only one left to regale the press about this soloist singing pipes. In the face of these incomprehensible events, Aya decides to do what any good cop would do and get in way over her head without calling for backup first. Melissa, who we will learn a bit later goes by the name Eve. Hey, that's in the title, must be important. Literally made people combust, and Aya thinks that her trusty sidearm and the authority of her badge are all she needs. When she makes her way center stage to confront Eve, the singer remarks that Aya is, quote, the only one who seems to be fine. She goes on to say cryptic things like, you should be awakening soon, and listen, your cells are trying to communicate. And communicate they do, through a series of flashbacks depicting presumably Aya on a hospital bed, though Aya also thinks it might be her twin sister Maya. Due to the juxtaposition of these flashbacks with key plot revelations about things like Eve, mitochondria, and the shady doings of Dr. Klomp, we're meant to piece together that whatever happened to Aya all those years ago in that hospital room is at the center of why Aya didn't spontaneously combust, and crucially, why Aya appears to have the same power as Eve. As we have our first scrap with Eve, Aya notes that her body is starting to get hot, which has gotta be her fishing for compliments, because that body done been being hot since... Oh, okay. Rein it in, Raven. We have to get through this with a modicum of professionalism. Where was I? Oh yeah, Aya's smoking hot body. Mostly her words, not mine, is indicative of her starting to wake up to her powers, which she will come to learn are similar to Eve's. Something Eve confirms when she says, quote, the more you use that power, the more you will become like me. And it's about time I dropped some totally legitimate science on all of y'all. Parasite Eve employs the theory of mitochondrial Eve, the idea that we are all connected on a cellular level to the first woman, Eve, via our mitochondrial DNA, which is passed from mother to child. Another helpful theory to tack on would be the endosymbiotic theory, which purports that the relationship between the cell and the mitochondria was not always symbiotic. To butcher some real-life science, we see this in single-celled organisms, and this theory suggests the possibility of an organelle like the mitochondria having been at one point in time capable of existing on its own as a prokaryotic organism. The endosymbiotic theory posits that eukaryotic cells, like the ones in the human body, stem from these ancient prokaryotic organisms I have just described very poorly here. The novel, film, and game extend these theories with the premise that the mitochondria can and in fact desire to mutate and take over human organisms because they could just do it all so much better. Those millennia of symbiosis were in fact just a clever ruse in an attempt to lull dumb organisms like you and me into a false sense of security. This is done in the various Parasite Eve media via mutations of the cells within organs like kidneys and livers that are then donated to unsuspecting women, who in turn become Eves. Acting as mitochondria Eve, these women then can call out to the cells of others in order to make them spontaneously combust, melt into a gelatinous mass, etc. The end goal of all of this is to create a perfect mitochondrial organism unfettered by human limitations. And this mitochondrial takeover is exactly what's going on with Melissa Pierce as she performs her solo. That's right, those mighty mutinous mitochondria in Melissa's cells had themselves a good old-fashioned uprising. Those nuclei been getting fat off the labor of the other organelles for too dang long. The catch to all of this pseudoscience is that these superhuman mitochondria need a host. That's where the whole parasite part of the title comes in. The most recent of them being Melissa, whom Aya confronts on day one. But through her encounters with the ever-suspicious Dr. Klomp, as well as elucidations from the scientist Dr. Maeda, Aya will come to realize that she and Melissa share some pretty interesting commonalities, as well as crucial differences on a cellular level. I'm gonna stop there because spoilers. Now, if you're a bit confused, that's okay. Squaresoft may have taken the original concept from a novelist, but good writers this team were not. All of the details are there, and they're pretty interesting. And though I wouldn't say they left any loose ends, the writers definitely left too much interpretive work up to the players with this one. What I mean is we are inundated with a lot of really significant details that all contribute toward this incredibly convoluted plot. But the writers don't spend enough time connecting all the dots in coherent, meaningful ways. And while I find it much more frustrating and quite frankly insulting when video game writers do too much hand-holding in regard to ensuring we understand the plot, the writers of Parasite Eve definitely didn't give us enough. I'd argue a big reason for this is because the original artistic vision was someone else's. That's a surefire way to fuck up the writing. It's not your baby. To get biblical, you don't know the number of hairs on its head. How could you get it absolutely right? Again, all the pieces are there, so I'm not gonna say there are loose ends or even plot holes, but there's not enough explanation of the incredibly significant details we unearthed during the course of the game. The only two substantial moments where I can see the writers try to make all the plot points crystallize into a cohesive whole is one, during a 2-minute car ride where instead it's all just hastily slapped together, and two, when Aya, Dr. Maeda, and Daniel are staring at the water after having just defeated the ultimate being. This plot is complex. Short little scenes like that, one of them, again, being 2 minutes only, ain't gonna cut it. For the car ride scene especially, instead of being the big revelation it really needed to be where everything comes together and we finally understand why Aya is at the center of all of this, it comes off more as just a way to kill time during the transition from the museum to the naval ship. And really, we needed things to crystallize right before the big showdown. Like that would have been the right way to do it, and it just didn't happen. If your plot is full of details that are larger than life, your writing needs to move mountains. That just never happened here. Even the cutscenes, which were really awesome looking and creepy, focus less on emphasizing key plot points and seemingly more on saying, "It's 1998, motherfuckers! Look at the cool shit we can do!" At the end of the day, the writing is probably the biggest strike against the game, but I still think it's worth it because the concept is still really cool. It's kind of like one of those college courses where the professor doesn't actually teach, but the material is super important. Just be prepared to have to teach yourself with this one. Before we leave the plot for good, I did want to bring up, in my opinion, the most compelling storyline that actually received the right amount of attention and development. I'm talking about Daniel's and Captain Baker's storyline from days 2 and 3. To keep this long story short, I just want to focus on some of the developments in day 3. Ben, Daniel's son, becomes close with Shiva, one of the NYPD's dogs in the K9 unit. In day 3, Eve attacks the police station and causes the rapid mutation of Shiva into a Cerberus-like monster. With Daniel out with Aya and Maeda trying to dig up more on Eve, Captain Baker is the only one still at the police station who can protect Ben from Shiva. At a crucial moment, Captain Baker steps in and starts firing shots at the dog while placing his body in front of Ben. And here's where the writing fucking brings you to your knees. Shiva was Captain Baker's K9 partner. Before Baker was promoted to captain, he and Daniel were the best of friends, and he even used to come over and spend time with Ben. This scene is devastating. Captain Baker steps up and makes the toughest choice imaginable. He attacks his former trusted partner in order to defend his former best friend's son. And it's a battle he knows full well he absolutely cannot win, and will most likely die from. While much of the writing just doesn't get to the fucking point in any meaningful way, this was brilliant. Moving on from the plot, I have pretty much nothing but good things to say about Parasite Eve. The gameplay is a mixture of exploration and turn-based combat with an innovative twist. Let's start with the exploration. It's actually pretty challenging, and your curiosity is greatly rewarded. This is absolutely essential. We have our obvious shiny objects, but the NYC-specific environments in which we find ourselves also have secret areas to uncover with primo loot that makes our nosiness well worth the effort. You also want to inspect every dead body in every drawer because some key items aren't prominently displayed. This worked really well in terms of keeping me interested in the environments through which I had to guide Aya. Turning to the combat, it's accurate to say it's technically turn-based, but the mechanics of combat demand much more engagement from the player with the addition of the action component. You have an active time gauge that, once filled, allows you to take another action. But you must move around the field of battle in order to evade enemy attacks and then get close enough so that the enemy target is in range of whatever equipment you're using. You also will come across so many different weapon types to choose from as you take on bigger and badder freaks. But just as the enemies have been supercharged by awakened mitochondria, as Aya levels up, her parasite energy powers start to awaken, giving you healing, offensive, buffing, and debuffing skills to add to your arsenal. All of these elements contribute to a very immersive combat experience that will keep you on your toes. And maybe not keeping you on your toes, but keeping your toes tapping, the soundtrack is such a vibe. It's like the precursor to lo-fi. There were times when I should have been paying closer attention to keeping our girl Aya alive, but all I could focus on was how those beats got my head bobbing. The tracks could probably be a bit creepier to be more compatible with the game's genre, but I'm not mad in the slightest about what we got. Before concluding, I do think it's important to mention the overall difficulty of the game. For much of it, you can make your way through with a decent bit of challenge. Yes, you'll come toe-to-toe with some fearsome, tough opponents, but as long as you're not stupid about your item use, you'll be just fine. Be that as it may, the difficulty spikes exponentially once you get to the second disc. Disc 1 had a much steadier rise in difficulty where you really felt prepared for every new challenge, based on having struggled through but ultimately overcome each one prior. Not so once you pop that second disc in. My god, Disc 2 comes in hot and the only word I can think of is unreasonable. It is ridiculous how abruptly and exponentially this game's difficulty increases, only made worse by the fact that the ultimate being has too many fucking forms. What is this, a DBZ fight? Jesus Christ! All in all, Parasite Eve is a really interesting game that offers such an innovative gameplay experience, definitely worth checking out. While the story development could have benefited from better execution, if you're willing to do your own homework, you'll definitely be entertained.